I died, and in those few minutes, everything I thought I knew about life, death, and God was turned upside down. What I saw, what I heard, what I felt, it shook me to the core. Not just because I crossed over, but because of what Jesus revealed to me while I was there. This isn't just a story about death. It's about truth, hidden truth, especially about Black people, their identity, and the divine role they were meant to play. You may think you know history. I thought I did too. But I was wrong. And if you listen, really listen, you might just realize we've all been wrong. October 5th, 2023, started out like any normal Thursday. I remember the smell of coffee brewing in my kitchen as I packed my things for another long night shift. My husband kissed me on the forehead and said, "Be safe, Em." I smiled, tired but thankful. I've been a nurse for almost 10 years, St. Luke's Hospital. The night shift always hits hardest when you haven't slept well, but I made it through like I always did. It was a blur of vitals, charts, medication runs, and soft conversations with patients who couldn't sleep. I clocked out that morning running on caffeine and adrenaline, just looking forward to my warm bed and maybe a few uninterrupted hours of peace. I slid into my car, turned on the radio, and let the hum of music keep me company as I drove. The sky was still dark, the kind of heavy gray that comes before sunrise. Rain tapped softly against my windshield, and the roads were empty. I remember thinking how strange it was, how quiet the world felt, like everything was holding its breath. I was exactly 5 minutes from home. I could see the intersection up ahead, the familiar turn I made every single day. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I saw 2 headlights, bright, fast, and completely out of control. My heart slammed into my chest as I hit the brakes. Tires screeched. There was no time to think, no time to react. Just this feeling in my gut that something was very wrong. Then, metal crunched, glass shattered, my body jerked violently, and in an instant, everything went black. But the blackness didn't last. The first thing I remember was silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after an accident, the eerie quiet with sirens far away, but something different, deeper, eternal. There was no pain, no fear. It was like all the weight I'd ever carried in life, the stress, the guilt, the anxiety, had vanished. I was floating, weightless, suspended in something I can only describe as peace. I looked down and saw my body still strapped into the driver's seat, motionless. The car was mangled. Steam hissed from the engine. The driver's side window was shattered. And yet, I felt nothing. Only calm. I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it, watching everything unfold like a scene from someone else's life. The paramedics arrived quickly. Flashlights cut through the dark rain as they rushed to me, voices barking orders I couldn't quite hear. I saw one of them place fingers against my neck, then shake his head. They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I was there, trying to speak, to scream, to tell them I was okay. But no words came out. My mouth didn't move. My body wasn't mine anymore. Suddenly, a warm glow began to rise behind me. Not a light from the ambulance, not headlights or street lamps, but something different. Something alive. It grew brighter, surrounding me with a warmth that soaked into every part of who I was. And then I felt it, something pulling me upward, gently but firmly, like a hand reaching into my soul and lifting it higher. I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. I knew that wherever I was going, it was where I was meant to be. The world below began to fade like a dream you're waking up from, and ahead of me, there was light. Not blinding or cold, but pure, alive, full of love. And I knew deep in my spirit, I was about to meet the one who had always been watching, always been guiding, even when I couldn't see him. Jesus was waiting, and what he was about to reveal would change everything. As I moved toward the light, every part of me felt like it was being drawn back to something ancient, something eternal, something that had always been a part of me, but that I had somehow forgotten. The peace I felt was unlike anything on earth. It wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual, like I had stepped out of time and into the heart of truth itself. And then, I heard it. A voice. Not just any voice. This one didn't just echo around me, it echoed through me. My name. Emily. It was gentle and powerful at the same time, like thunder wrapped in velvet. The sound of it pulled me forward faster than before. And then I saw him. Jesus. I didn't question it, didn't second guess, didn't need proof. I knew. My soul recognized him instantly, like a child recognizing the voice of their father after a long separation. There were no words to describe what he looked like, because his presence was more than sight. He radiated love, light, power, and something else. A kind of sadness, like he carried the weight of the whole world on his shoulders and still chose to love us through it. His eyes, when I met his eyes, it was like every wound I'd ever buried. Every hidden piece of me I didn't think anyone could understand was seen, known, and held in absolute love. I fell to my knees before I even realized it. Not out of fear, not even out of awe, but because there was no other way to respond when standing in front of the one who created everything and still knew me by name. He reached out his hand to me, and when our fingers touched, I felt life itself surge through me. Not just energy, life. Like his very essence was filling every empty part of me I didn't even know was empty. Every doubt vanished, every fear melted, every burden I had carried on earth evaporated like mist. And then he spoke again. "Rise, my child," he said, his voice like music woven into wind and water. I stood, trembling, not with fear, but with reverence. He looked at me, and it was as if all of heaven stood still. "I have something to show you," he said, "a truth that has been hidden for far too long." I nodded, unable to speak, because deep down, I already sensed what was coming would shatter everything I thought I knew. Without walking, we moved. We weren't in heaven anymore, not in the traditional sense. It felt like we had stepped into time itself, like standing in a dimension that hovered above history. I could see moments unfolding all around us, civilizations rising and falling, empires being built and torn down, people from all corners of the earth moving through time. There were wars, victories, celebrations, heartbreak. It was like I was watching human history from the outside, but with spiritual eyes. Then the scenes shifted again, and Jesus turned to me, his expression grave yet full of compassion. "Emily," he said, "what you're about to see has been kept from the world, hidden, erased, twisted, but you must see it clearly." The space around us shimmered, and suddenly, I was standing in a vast city I had never seen before, yet it felt strangely familiar. It was ancient, yes, but untouched, alive with golden light that seemed to come from the structures themselves. The buildings rose high, crafted from stone and gold, carved with symbols I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The air itself felt wise, as if it carried the voices of the past. Then I saw the people. Men and women with skin like polished bronze and deep mahogany. They walked with a grace I've never seen, a quiet authority that didn't need to prove itself. Their garments were rich, flowing, royal. Their eyes sparkled with knowledge. They moved not like oppressed people, but like royalty. And then Jesus whispered the words that would burn into my soul forever. "These are my people." My breath caught. These were black men and women, not as the world portrays them, not as history books define them, but as they truly were. Priests, scientists, kings, prophets, healers, rulers. They were not slaves, Jesus said. They were chosen, set apart, anointed, but the world rewrote their story. My eyes filled with tears. I saw scrolls in their hands, maps of the stars, medicines crafted from the earth, symbols that told of deep understanding and divine connection. They didn't just survive, they led. They didn't just believe, they knew. Then, as quickly as the vision came, it began to fade into something darker. I saw flames, chains, ships. I saw fear replacing wisdom. I saw lies being spoken as truth. I saw generations being told they were inferior, worthless, forgotten. The images broke me. Jesus stood beside me, eyes filled with sorrow but strength. The enemy feared them, he said, so he rewrote their identity. He buried their legacy beneath centuries of deception. He convinced the world that these were the cursed, the least. But in truth, they were the first. My knees buckled and I collapsed, sobbing. Not because I didn't believe him, but because deep down, I knew he was right. I had never been taught this. I had never seen Black history portrayed beyond the pain, the suffering, the slavery. But here I was, standing in the presence of Jesus himself, and he was showing me what had been hidden on purpose. They weren't just survivors of oppression. They were the origin of brilliance, the keepers of sacred knowledge, the ones who carried God's breath into this world. They carry a faith that cannot be stolen, Jesus said. Even when everything else was stripped from them, they remembered me. I looked again, and through the sorrow and stolen identity, I began to see it. The thread, the unbroken thread of divine purpose, the seed that could never be uprooted, the glory that had been covered in dust, but never destroyed. And in that moment, I realized this was more than a revelation. It was a call for truth, a call to remember, a call to rise. The vision shifted again, and what I saw next pierced deeper than anything before. The light from that ancient city dimmed, and darkness crept in like smoke filling a sacred space. The same people I had just seen, strong, royal, wise, were now in chains. Their shoulders that once carried crowns now bore burdens. Their hands, which once held scrolls and healing herbs, were now bound in iron. Their eyes, once full of light and knowing, were dimmed with sorrow. I saw them lined up, pushed onto ships like cattle, taken from their homelands, stripped of their language, their culture, their names. Everything sacred was taken from them, and Jesus never left my side. "This is what the world remembers," he said, his voice laced with sorrow. "But it is not where their story began." I saw the ships cutting through waves under the weight of human suffering. The cries of mothers torn from children, fathers chained beside sons, echoed louder than the ocean. I saw beatings, starvation, disease, and yet I also saw something more. I saw faith. Somehow, even in the darkest depths of the slave ships, I saw lips mouthing silent prayers. I saw eyes turned upward toward a sky that they believed still held hope. Even then, they were reaching for God. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder again and said, "The enemy feared what was inside of them, the strength, the calling, the divine spark. So he attacked them at the root, not just physically, but spiritually. And then I saw it. I saw entire systems being built, brick by brick, generation by generation, all with one goal, to erase the truth of who these people were. They weren't just being enslaved in body, they were being targeted in identity. If you can make them forget who they are, Jesus said, you can make them believe they are nothing." The vision moved forward in time, and I saw schools, cold, lifeless, teaching half-truths and sanitized history. I saw books that left out the brilliance, the victories, the kingdoms that once thrived with Black leadership and divine purpose. I saw churches that stayed silent, pulpits that refused to acknowledge the pain or the promise. I saw governments writing laws designed to keep them down, to keep them angry, to keep them disconnected from me. I saw media painting them with brushstrokes of violence, ignorance, and hypersexuality. I saw mothers working 3 jobs while being shamed, fathers imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit, children disciplined more harshly than others for the same mistakes. And all the while the world whispered, "See? This is just who they are." But Jesus looked at me and his eyes burned with truth. "No," he said. "This is what they were made to believe. This is not their identity. This is the result of a war against their destiny." And then the image shifted again. I saw a wave, a shaking, a slow but powerful rise. I saw black men and women lifting their heads. I saw them searching, asking, questioning. I saw them returning to the roots they were never taught. Not just cultural roots, but spiritual ones. I saw hands opening Bibles and finding verses that suddenly made sense in a new way. I saw prayers spoken with power and hunger. I saw children being told they were kings and queens, not criminals and burdens. I saw them rising. Jesus smiled, not with ease, but with hope. "The awakening has already begun," he said. "The enemy tried to bury them, but he didn't realize they were seeds." I watched as entire communities began to shift. I saw pastors stand up and speak truth without fear. I saw mothers declaring over their children that they were blessed, not broken. I saw fathers returning home, leading with strength and grace. I saw artists painting the truth, poets reclaiming history, teachers refusing to follow broken systems. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet at first, like a heartbeat building in strength. But it was powerful, unstoppable. Jesus continued, "They have always carried me. Through every whip, every lie, every system designed to kill their faith, they still looked for me, and now I am calling them by name." I saw young men in the streets lifting their hands not in surrender to man, but in surrender to God. I saw women leading prayer circles in neighborhoods the world had written off. I saw music shifting, not just beats and rhythms, but messages, lyrics that lifted instead of poisoned. I saw a return to identity, not borrowed identity, not survival mode identity, but divine identity. I saw people breaking off the labels of less than and walking boldly in the knowledge that they were chosen. Royalty, not because of what the world said, but because of what God said. And I heard the sound of worship, not polished or rehearsed, raw, unfiltered, real, coming from hearts that had been broken and healed, crushed and raised again. I saw the chains break, not just the visible ones, but the chains of self-hate, addiction, comparison, hopelessness. I saw generations coming together, elders speaking truth into the young, and the young walking in that truth without shame. And all the while, Jesus whispered, "They are remembering who they are." I saw the enemy panic. I saw distractions increasing, more entertainment, more false movements, more temptations disguised as opportunity. But it was too late. The fire had already been lit. It was spreading, not because of politics, not because of fame, but because the Spirit of God was awakening his people. They were never meant to be silent, Jesus said. They were meant to lead, to teach, to heal, to worship, to build. They were meant to carry the sound of heaven. And now, they are beginning to hear it again. I stood there, overwhelmed, watching this divine resurrection unfold. And I understood. This wasn't just a correction of history. It was a restoration of identity, a reclaiming of purpose, a holy revival. The enemy knew their power before they did. That's why he fought so hard to silence them. But now they were rising, not with bitterness, but with boldness, not with vengeance, but with vision. And nothing would stop what God had already set in motion. The peace of the last vision began to tremble, and I felt the atmosphere around me shift. The light faded into a kind of heavy gray, and what replaced it sent a chill through me. I saw cities, modern ones, flashing lights, phones in every hand, giant screens on buildings, music blaring through earbuds, people scrolling, laughing, consuming. But beneath it all, something darker was pulsing, something I didn't notice at first. And Jesus, still beside me, said only this: "Now I will show you how the enemy works when chains are no longer visible." Suddenly I saw how the enemy had adapted. He was no longer using whips and shackles. He was using distractions, illusions, counterfeits. He was weaving his agenda not through force, but through comfort. I saw entire communities lulled to sleep by entertainment designed to numb the spirit, music that glorified destruction, movies that distorted truth, social media that drowned out the soul's cry for meaning with endless noise. I saw young black boys being told from every angle that their worth depended on how tough they looked or how much they owned. I saw young girls taught that their bodies were their only currency, that their beauty defined their value. I saw television shows where pain was normalized and chaos was marketed as culture. And the enemy smiled. I saw schools feeding a watered-down history, one that began with slavery and ended with civil rights, but skipped the glory, the power, the divine origin. I saw churches, some filled with people, others empty, but in too many, the truth had been traded for palatable lies. Preachers more focused on being liked than being honest. Sermons that avoided pain instead of confronting it. And I saw black leaders, once bold and righteous, bowing to money, influence, and approval. Jesus said, "The enemy has infiltrated everything, systems, screens, pulpits, but he no longer needs to chain their bodies. He only needs to distract their minds." I saw the subtle, chilling effect of it all. Minds were being shaped, molded to forget their spiritual inheritance, to forget their calling, to forget me. "Do you see it, Emily?" Jesus asked. He's not fighting them with weapons. They're fighting their own reflection. They're told they're not enough from the moment they're born. The enemy uses fear, shame, comparison, and confusion, but none of it is truth. And then I saw a new vision, an even deeper layer. I saw black communities in boardrooms, classrooms, and studios, but wearing masks. Not physical ones, but invisible layers of performance and survival. Trying to fit in, trying to be acceptable, trying not to seem too strong, too loud, too proud. And underneath it, I saw pain. Silent pain. Generations of being told to shrink. And I saw it fueling depression, anxiety, addiction, even rage. But instead of being seen, they were being judged, criminalized, dismissed. The enemy had turned their trauma into entertainment, their struggle into ratings, their culture into a costume, and it was everywhere. But Jesus wasn't finished. He took me deeper, and I saw something incredible beginning to happen. In the quiet corners of forgotten places, I saw candles lighting one by one. Not literal flames. These were souls awakening. I saw a woman sitting at her kitchen table reading the word and suddenly weeping, not from sadness but from recognition. She had found herself in the scriptures. I saw a man falling to his knees in the middle of the night, overwhelmed by a presence he hadn't felt in years. I saw teenagers deleting music that no longer resonated with their spirit. I saw pastors repenting, not just for personal sin, but for silence, for compromise, for fear. It was happening everywhere. Jesus looked at me and said, "They are starting to remember, not because the world is helping them, but because I am calling them." The vision swelled and I saw it spreading, not as a movement, not as a trend, as a revival, a heart-level awakening, one person at a time, then groups, then entire churches, entire neighborhoods. They weren't shouting for recognition anymore, they were standing in revelation. They didn't just want justice, they wanted Jesus. They weren't asking for validation, they were stepping into identity. I saw men speaking boldly again, not in anger, but in authority. I saw women leading, healing, and teaching, not from borrowed pulpits, but from spirit-born conviction. I saw children praying in classrooms, over their families, in the streets. They weren't waiting for permission. They weren't waiting for mainstream media to care. They were walking in the power of their calling. Jesus whispered, "This is what the enemy fears the most. Not protest, not power, not politics. He fears their awakening. He fears what happens when they stop looking outside for worth and look up." I saw spiritual gifts returning, prophetic dreams, discernment, songs that carried healing, messages that shook buildings. People who had been overlooked for decades suddenly carrying answers to problems the world couldn't solve. I saw miracles, physical healing, emotional deliverance, financial breakthroughs, marriages restored, generational curses breaking, not because of religion, but because of relationship. And then the vision reached a new height. I saw an ancient book, one I hadn't seen before. The pages were golden, the ink glowed like fire. Jesus opened it, and on the pages were names I didn't recognize. And yet, I felt them. They were ancestors, intercessors, carriers of truth who had prayed, cried, bled, and died holding on to a promise they never got to see. And now, their descendants were rising to fulfill it. They have always been my remnant, Jesus said. Now, they are my revival. The atmosphere around me shifted once again, and this time I felt something fierce, almost electric in the air. The light returned, but it wasn't soft. It pulsed, surged, almost like the heartbeat of something powerful being reborn. I was no longer just witnessing individuals awakening. I saw a people rising, not rising in rebellion, not storming buildings or demanding titles. This was different. This was spiritual. I saw Black men and women walking in the streets, in churches, in schools, in places of influence, not begging, not apologizing, but moving in quiet authority. They weren't shouting for recognition. They knew who they were, and that knowing changed everything. Jesus stood beside me, and his face was filled with something I didn't expect. Pride. Holy pride. Not arrogance, not superiority, but the kind of joy a father feels when his children remember who they are. These are the ones who would not bow, he said. They would not surrender to the lies. They refused to forget their name. I looked closer and saw leaders emerging, not from platforms, but from pain. I saw prophets rising up from prisons. I saw healers coming out of hospitals. I saw teachers who had once been labeled failures, now awakening minds. These people weren't waiting for invitations. They were walking and calling. Everywhere I looked, I saw the rejected becoming the foundation. I saw young men, once written off as dangerous, becoming protectors of their communities. I saw women who had been silenced stepping into roles as visionaries and revivalists. I saw businesses rising in places where poverty had ruled for generations. I saw families that had been shattered now restored, fathers returning, mothers strengthened, children covered in prayer before they left for school. I saw a return to what had been stolen. But it wasn't a return to a version of the past. It was the manifestation of a promise. And then I saw the enemy panic. I saw him scrambling, trying every weapon he had left. Division, comparison, false teaching, even counterfeit spirituality. He tried to sow discord among those who had just found unity. He whispered lies into churches, stirring jealousy and fear. He tried to pit generations against each other, young against old, men against women, light skin against dark skin, urban against rural. But it didn't work. Because this time their eyes were open. Their ears were tuned to something higher. They've heard my voice, Jesus said. And once you've heard it, the enemy's voice becomes nothing but noise. Then I saw the divide. A great spiritual line being drawn, not by race or politics, but by truth. Those who clung to deception, who traded conviction for comfort, began to fall away. Some had influence, wealth, status, but they had no power. Their platforms crumbled, their names faded. They had aligned with the world, and the world offered them nothing eternal. But those who stood, those who remained faithful, even when it cost them everything, they were radiant, glorious, like lamps on a hill. They were not perfect, but they were pure. They didn't have all the answers, but they carried the presence of God. They weren't famous, but they were anointed. I saw entire cities shifting, crime rates dropping, schools changing, church walls expanding, not physically, but spiritually, to include those once turned away. I saw the arts reclaimed, music that healed, films that told the truth, literature that pointed people back to God. I saw a revival not confined to Sunday mornings, but woven into everyday life. And it wasn't led by celebrities or politicians. It was led by the very people the world tried to silence, the first becoming last, the last becoming first. Just like Jesus said. I asked him, "How can this be? How is this possible?" He looked at me, eyes full of fire and tenderness, and said, "Because they were never forgotten. They were hidden, protected, preserved, for such a time as this." And then I saw something that took my breath away. I saw a mountain, massive, immovable, and standing on it were black men and women of every age, every background. They were lifting their hands to heaven, not out of desperation but out of victory. The sky above them glowed. Thunder rumbled, not with destruction, but with declaration. God was speaking again, and his people were answering. They are not just recovering, Jesus said. They are reigning. They are stepping into their inheritance. But he wasn't finished. The vision continued, and I saw a storm on the horizon, a final deception, a last desperate attempt by the enemy to blind them again. I saw systems being rebuilt with new names but the same roots. They were cloaked in progress, equality, unity. But beneath the surface was control, silence, compromise. I saw platforms rising that claimed to uplift, but in truth, they sedated. I saw leaders that seemed kind, but whose hearts were far from God. I saw movements that wore the language of justice, but were void of truth. And the target was clear, this rising remnant, the ones who had woken up. But even as I watched the storm rise, I saw something greater, those who remained in the secret place, those who kept their eyes fixed on God. They were not shaken, they were not deceived, because they had been through the fire before. They knew the sound of the shepherd's voice, and they would not be moved. Tell them, Jesus said, do not be afraid of what is coming. Tell them to prepare, not with fear, but with faith, because I have already overcome it. I saw families gathering together to pray in their homes again. I saw people waking up before the sun just to seek his face. I saw children being taught the word not just in church, but at the dinner table. I saw dreams returning, visions that stirred entire communities. I saw provision pouring in from unexpected places. And above all, I saw joy, not shallow happiness, real, unshakable, defiant joy, because they knew who they were, and nothing could take that from them now. Jesus turned to me one last time, and his voice echoed like thunder in my soul. The time is short. The battle will be great, but the victory is already written. Tell them to stay close to me, to cling to truth, to protect what I've placed inside them, because what I am doing now will echo into eternity. And with that, the vision began to fade. The mountain, the people, the fire in the sky, all of it pulling back like the tide. But the imprint it left on me was permanent. I wasn't just a witness, I was a messenger, and I knew what I had to do. I had to tell the truth, because the world is not ready, but the people must be.